You couldn't separate blacks and whites in South Africa into two separate states, so the victims may have a state of their own and the perpetrators may be separated into another state. There were groups of people in this country who did think so, who thought that there should have been a separate state. It didn't work because it didn't have public political support either. Hutu and Tutsi in Rwanda have to live together. You can't have a Hutu land separate from a Tutsi land. So the question we are confronted with is not simply punishment, but life after punishment. You can have a terrible thing happen in a marriage, and if you decide to go separate ways, you look at that thing differently. But if you decide to stay in the marriage, then you will treat that terrible thing in a different way. You will subordinate it to the interests of the marriage of life to come. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying we have no choice. We have to live together. The problem is, you see, our societies were put together by a colonial experience, and this is true throughout this continent, by a colonial experience where the principal objective was to divide societies. The principal objective was to fragment societies. The nation-building project did not begin with colonialism. It began at the end of colonialism. Everywhere we have this violence, small in some places, large in other places, but everywhere we have violence between those who think they own the state, have a right to exclusive occupation of the country, and those who feel they are excluded. We need a new compact of citizenship. But my problem is that they have so moralized this question. They've completely depoliticized it. And indeed, you have to depoliticize it. You have to remove the politics from it if you're going to take it to a court of law. And there's a problem with it, because then you will only focus on the individual as a criminal. You will not be able to figure out why this criminal was followed by these hundreds. I'm not saying we justify criminality, okay? I'm saying you know, at the end of wars, you have amnesties declared. Amnesty is not declared because everybody says there was no crime, there were no criminals, there was nothing wrong that was done. Amnesty is declared because people say that we want to move beyond this situation. We don't deny what has happened. We don't forget what has happened, right? We don't even necessarily forgive what has happened, draw appropriate lessons from it. And I'm saying that the real thing that needs to happen is not the identification and punishment of individuals, but the reform, political reform, social reform, the reform that will address the grievances of millions of people who got involved in this.
Gee, I think he has an interesting point that he's making. Maybe, Prof, just these two callers. His point was that this is not the first time this is happening in Africa.
What is not the first time?
What you're proposing, that we find an alternative to the Nuremberg-style approach.
You know, he's completely right. What I am saying is that we have shut our eyes to our own experience. And we need to open our eyes and ask ourselves, what has worked on this continent? It's part of a larger problem. We tend to look for solutions like prescriptions from outside the continent. We tend to think that knowledge and wisdom comes from somewhere else, and in the process we just shut our eyes to our own experience. We fail to draw conclusions from it. He's absolutely right. And that's what I was saying, that this is what happened in Uganda after '86. This is what happened in South Africa. This is what happened in Mozambique. So instead of exceptionalizing each of these events, why don't we say, what was this? What was common between these? And why don't we take that as the way forward? Let me answer the first question.
Yeah.
From our lawyer friend, the advocate. You know, he's raising the question of accountability, and it's a very interesting question, because, you know, when you look at accountability, you have two kinds of accountability. You have the accountability of the perpetrator, and then you have the accountability of the enforcer of the law. And I would say to you that the more important accountability of the two is the accountability of the enforcer of the law. People who live in poor communities know that it's far more important that the police be accountable than the criminals being accountable. Because if the police is not accountable, then all you have is a regime of warlords. And the problem is with this legal paradigm, this judicial process that we're being given, is that it's without political accountability. It's being used for political purposes selectively, internationally, and within the continent. We haven't yet evolved a democratic system of accountability, which is Africa-wide. We're putting the cart before the horse. You can't devise legal systems without devising a democratic political system. No court in South Africa would have had credibility without dismantling apartheid as a political system. I'm not saying forget about criminal accountability, but I'm saying understand we have to locate it within a larger question. The larger question is the political question. Unfortunately, CODESA has been presented in the language of compromise and pragmatism. One thing about compromises and pragmatism is that they are opportunistic. There's nothing to take home from there. There's nothing that you can apply to another situation. There's nothing translatable, transportable. And what I'm saying is that let's take a second look at CODESA. CODESA was not simply a compromise, but CODESA also showed a different way out. It showed a non-military way out. It showed a way out where winner would not have to take all. So that's what I'm saying. It showed us a political way out rather than a military, juridical way out. I'm also saying the second thing